Movies are a kind of magic, but even the best sorcerers can cast a bad spell. Like Martin Scorsese did with Boxcar Bertha. Released in 1972, it was Scorsese's second feature film and his first crime drama, a genre he would later redefine. Although Scorsese's debut had been controversial, it had garnered critical praise. But Boxcar, produced by B-movie king Roger Corman, didn't enjoy that type of reception. After seeing a cut of the movie, fellow filmmaker John Cassavetes famously told Scorsese, "Marty, you've just spent a whole year of your life making a piece of shit. Next time, do something personal." Scorsese did, creating one of his best films as a direct result of his worst. Does directing a bad movie make you a bad director? No, not at all. Every director in this video has made incredible work, and even their worst movies are worth watching. Not always for the stories the films tell, but because they often reveal something fascinating about the directors' lives and careers at the time. Like how James Cameron also got his big break and worst movie by collaborating with Roger Corman, directing Piranha 2. Jaws had spawned a boom in animal horror ripoffs and cash grabs, some of which are actually pretty fun. Piranha 2 isn't the worst of them, but it's pretty bad. In fairness, Cameron doesn't deserve much of the blame. He had no creative control, and the film was shot with an Italian crew who did not speak English. It was a nightmarish experience, but ultimately a profitable one. Plagued by exhaustion, Cameron fell ill and experienced a fever dream of a metallic skeleton rising from flames, a monstrous vision that would inspire the Terminator. Speaking of monsters, Guillermo del Toro's Mimic faced them both in front of and behind the camera. His American debut was marred by heavy studio interference, most notably from famed convict Harvey Weinstein, who infamously stormed the set trying to take over. Making any movie is hard, but it may have been especially difficult for Del Toro, because in his early career he was attempting to create a genre that hadn't quite existed, an elevated, almost theatrical, big-budget creature feature. The production was so painful that Del Toro retreated into comic books for solace, where he discovered Hellboy, a character who would help shape the Del Toro we know today. As for Mimic, it does have flashes of his visual genius, and his love of monsters shines through. A more recent director's cut is an improvement, but the theatrical version underperformed, and Del Toro ultimately disowned it, just like David Fincher did with Alien 3. Fincher had made a name for himself as a music video director when he was brought onto the project. As Sigourney Weaver put it, executives made the brilliant decision to hire Fincher and the idiotic decision to not listen to him. A third Alien film had been in development hell for years, with no clear path forward. The franchise had already established two distinct tones, a haunted house in space and a war movie, but what tied the films together was their focus on tension and character, which is where Alien 3 fell short. It's hard to fault Fincher. The script was constantly rewritten, and many of the worst decisions, like killing off Newt and Hicks, weren't his. Still, the film's reputation as a disaster is a bit unfair. Visually, it's often striking, with one of the most iconic images in the whole series, but it lacks the tight pacing and suspense of its predecessors. The chaos of the production left Fincher recoiling from the lack of control, something he fiercely avoided in his later work. But just because a genius is given creative control, that doesn't always mean the result will be amazing. Just ask Stanley Kubrick. The legendary filmmaker who would go on to create some of cinema's greatest works started his career with full creative control on his very first feature, but the result left him so embarrassed that he reportedly tried to destroy the film's negative and any copies he could find. Fear and Desire was a low-budget war drama about soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. Produced independently with a tiny crew, the film seemingly vanished for decades after its premiere, and was even considered lost media. When Prince finally resurfaced, it became clear why Kubrick had wanted it buried. The performances are stiff, the dialogue heavy-handed, and Kubrick himself dismissed it as a bumbling amateur exercise. You can see glimpses of the themes that would define Kubrick's later work, complex explorations of human nature and the horrors of war. The missteps most likely came from just not knowing enough about how movies work, which was not the case for Quentin Tarantino's weakest movie. Death Proof came after his genre-focused experiments with the Kill Bill films, which were a successful mix of action, martial arts, western, and revenge story. Death Proof was meant to be a love letter to the grindhouse cinema Tarantino adored, released as part of an interesting experimental double feature with Robert Rodriguez. But while Kill Bill had showcased Tarantino's ability to blend style with compelling characters, Death Proof struggled to do the same. The film features incredible car stunts, but the characters feel shallow, and the dialogue, usually a Tarantino standout, lacks its usual spark. Death Proof was an homage to little-known filmmakers, but even the world's most famous filmmaker makes mistakes. Steven Spielberg's 1941, a comedy set shortly after the Pearl Harbor attacks, came out at the peak of his early career. As the man who literally invented the modern blockbuster, Spielberg had all the resources he could have wanted, which actually arguably worked against him. Some of his best work comes from having production limitations. When you're able to indulge every idea, you don't push for more creative solutions. 1941 feels like the work of someone given a little too much freedom. The cast is remarkable, and there's real showmanship in the set pieces, but the result is loud, chaotic, and worst of all for a slapstick comedy, not very funny. Still, it taught Spielberg important lessons in restraint. Within just 3 years, he made Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T., beloved films with relatively modest budgets that perfectly blended heart and spectacle. I know we didn't cover every great director in this video. This one's a bit different from my recent work, so I wasn't sure if it's something you'd enjoy, but if you did, let me know in the comments. I'd love to make this a series if there's interest. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more content that feeds your curiosity.